I'm a queer woman. I'm a woman. I'm Latinx. And I feel like there's so much that hockey in general just misses the mark on, because it's so predominantly white and it's so predominantly like very hyper masculine at that. So I feel like there's so much that I don't think they realize excludes marginalized communities. I'm a longtime hockey fan. I started watching in 2005, and now I am a blogger at the Ice Garden. I reside in Buffalo, New York, and I cover the Buffalo Bugles.
Very cool. How did Angelica get into hockey?
It was entirely by chance. I actually started, of all things, I stumbled across the movie Miracle back when everybody had cable and we had all the Stars channels. It was on, and I was watching and I was like, oh my God, this is such a cool thing. Like, it was a really exciting sport to me. Um, and I became like really into the story of the 1980 hockey team. And from there, I was like, we have two, potentially three, if you include the Devils, teams in the tri-state area. I should start watching the NHL. So I started both watching the Rangers and the Islanders, and I actually became more of a fan of the Islanders because they always seemed like the underdog team to me. And at that time, Rick DiPietro was like their star goalie before he had all those injuries. And I really liked him. I thought that he was just, he was a lot of fun, and he was a really good goalie when he was healthy. And that kind of started my love affair with the Islanders. And it's kind of been up until a few years ago was when I stopped. Uh, I was into them until a few years ago, and then I stopped following the NHL on a really broad scale to kind of focus on the NWHL.
I love that you're focusing on women's hockey. I think more people need to and celebrate and watch the excellence that occurs there. What do you love about hockey?
It's just it's an exhilarating sport. I mean, you watch it and it's just like it shouldn't almost like it shouldn't be a thing. Like, you have these physically fit people on these tiny little blades chasing a rubber disc with sticks, and it's just like it seems so improbable just because of what we know about ice and nature and physics, I guess. But it definitely it's exhilarating and it's easy to follow. I think it's a very it's one of the most entertaining sports to watch both live and on TV. I've been into football, I've been into baseball, but those are not as exciting as watching a really intense hockey game.
Couldn't agree more. Based off your intersection of identities, how could hockey be better for you, and how could it be better for the queer community as a whole?
So, I mean, there are a lot of intersections. I mean, I'm a queer woman. I'm a woman. I'm Latinx. And I feel like there's so much that hockey in general just misses the mark on, because it's so predominantly white and it's so predominantly like very hyper masculine at that. So I feel like there's so much that I don't think they realize excludes marginalized communities. Obviously the way in which players of color have come forward and said they've been treated is horrendous. The way that uh, the NHL allows for people and players who um, have histories of assaults against women and domestic violence and sexual assault, all of that, like, that alienates their female fans. The latent and not so latent racism affects the fans of color, and then the performative allyship of being aligned with You Can Play, but not really doing much with that. And having ambassadors who have said bad things about and used homophobic slurs and showing that as a sign of progress instead of actually laying out what they've actually done, like what actionable courses they've taken to really educate their players. It's all very cloak and dagger, and I don't like that. I want it to be more out there. I want it to be more pronounced, and I want it to be less of a, oh, here's some gay wallpapers to put on your phone during Pride Month, and here's some merchandise with our logo in rainbow colors, and here's a Pride night for you, but the other 11 months out of the year we're just going to pretend that Andrew Shaw said one thing on the ice when you can clearly read his lips and see he saw something else, see that he said something else. It's very it's very two-faced, and it's very superficial, and it irks me that and even the bare minimum there, I mean, it's kind of showing this cultural this very cultural depth of bias and of bigotry, because even the bare minimum is lambasted by some of these neckbeards on Twitter who just want to type in oh, stick to hockey, stick to sports. I'm like, this is about hockey, this is about sports. People play sports. Gay people play sports. Trans people play sports. People of color play sports. People of color want to get into hockey. They want to play hockey. You see it all the time. Even some of the fans on Twitter, like Tony X, I mean, he stumbled across the St. Louis Blues game, and now he's one of the biggest, members of hockey Twitter because of his other insights. Stephen A. Smith, the way he's been commenting on hockey on ESPN, these are things that we can really focus on and show, yeah, we want more of this. And instead it's this whole gatekeepy kind of for lack of a better term, and I hope that I can swear, bullshit, because there's no other way to say it. It's just so aggravating to me, and I wish that it was less of that. But I think the only way that it can really improve is if the leagues themselves step up and are like, hey, we want more of this. We want to work with young people. We want to work with the gay community, actually work with the gay community, get channels out there where it's okay, we're going to give this feature to a gay player, or we want this segment to be about our fans of color, or actually do things that include these marginalized communities that feel that they're so silenced and marginalized. And I think that it's going to take a really, really honest, earnest effort on, especially the NHL's part at being the foremost, I guess, hockey organization. It's going to take a really, really honest effort on their part, because I feel like they've burned so many fans at this point. But yeah.
I mean, you've encapsulated everything I've been saying and tweeting and shouting about and saying to the league itself for several years now, and well said. I refer to it as having the parade before winning the cup.
Yes.
It's like you have these celebrations, but you haven't done anything to celebrate. You're just pinkwashing issues for fandoms without fixing it. And also, they've never touched or fixed actual hockey culture, like locker room culture. Right. And it's until you humanize all these issues, racism, misogyny, homophobia, ableism, etc., for your players who have been in this insular environment their entire lives, and then once you humanize and then educate them on it, because they will be receptive to education once it's humanized.
Yes.
Then you'll have more vocal allies, you'll have more people talking about it, and then people will feel seen. And then, once it's humanized for them, maybe then the teams will have no choice but to do better things for the fans, better stuff in the community, etc. Right. It drives me nuts.
No, and I agree. And I think that's also a really big part of why, especially younger players, like I see Igor Larionov talking all the time on Twitter. And I just love how outspoken he is about it and how willing to be an ally that he is, because I feel like that's kind of a step toward, if I think it's really going to come down to younger players, especially players, younger millennials, Gen Z, and after. I think they're going to be the ones to really kind of take the reins and be like, okay, you know what, like, yes, I'm a hockey player. Yes, this culture is what it is, but it doesn't need to be that way. I can change it. I can be one of the voices to step up and be like, hey, this is an inclusive league. This is an inclusive society. Everybody can play this game, no matter who you are, and everybody can be included. And it's not just, it's not just for straight white men.
It scares me though, I'm not going to lie to you, because I think you're right that like I genuinely do believe that younger people are more progressive, but I think this culture reinforces these and perpetuates the same conformist type attitudes and behaviors and it's so insular that 98%, like Igor grew up in LA, in
Right.
you know what I mean, going out in celebrity circles where he's been exposed to so much.
Right.
Whereas the average hockey player coming from, small town Canada hasn't. And then couple that with the insularity of being in locker room 6 to 7 nights a week.
Sure.
It's like I think you have more faith than I do.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it faith. I feel like at some point we kind of have to, though, because it's like, I don't know how else to really cope with the day to day if you don't have a little bit of faith. I think that it's also true that unfortunately our society and our culture and our history, it goes in cycles. We had this very same kind of openness toward the, gay, queer, trans, rainbow community back in the 1920s. And then it kind of circled back around into this very conservative culture. And I think now we're kind of seeing another cultural shift toward a more openness toward the LGBTQIA plus community, and to making sure that they feel included. However, I think that with everything that's at our hands now that we didn't have 100 some years ago, I think that there is a little bit more of a hopefulness, like a cautious optimism toward, okay, I think we really do have the opportunity to change, because even a small town person from Canada can, turn on Google and, check out a book from the library or watch a video on YouTube and realize that there's a whole world beyond his backyard. Even, somebody who maybe has never met a gay person, or really has only had maybe one Black classmate or teammate in their lives, can see that, maybe Black people shouldn't be killed for things that are by and large inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but are systematically targeted by our police communities or by our police system. There's a lot more education and there's a lot more information surrounding it. I feel like in a lot of ways, people who don't take advantage of that are people who don't want to take advantage of that.
So with all of that said, what keeps you in hockey?
I feel like it's kind of tearing it down from the inside. I can't change anything unless I'm a part of it. I can't change anything unless I, buckle down and I'm like, you know what? No, I deserve to be here just as much as you do. And I am not going to cede. I've thought many, many times of just leaving hockey altogether. And, even with the NWHL, with some of the stuff that has happened with them, with the transphobia surrounding Digit Murphy and the Toronto Six, and with the the work that we still need to do regarding trans inclusion in the league. And with all of that, there have been times when I've just, and with the whole situation with that media outlet that shall not be named back in January, all of that was reason enough for me to be like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I really doing here if it seems like nobody wants me here? But then I'm like, no, I want me here. I'm like, and there are people who want me here. And there are people who want to be heard and seen and related to as much as I do. And I can't let that go. You know, it's been part of my life, half my life now. I started watching when I was 14. I'm 30 years old now. Like, giving up that amount of time and effort, you know, I went into school for journalism because I wanted to be a hockey writer. You know, so it's like, I never played the sport. I never was in a position to play the sport. I grew up in freaking Brooklyn, New York, of all places. There's not a lot of ice there, but I love this sport, and I feel like I deserve as much of a spot here as anybody else does. And I want to be that person that, even if somebody else feels like they're not welcome, I'm like, no, you know, here, I'm right here, sit next to me. I'll tell you everything you want to know.
I love that, because we need to take up space.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not taking up space, then we're not helping the next generation of folks coming up in the sport, right?
No.
What gives you hope for queer people in the sport?
I think the fact that we have forged a community. I mean, we forged a community on social media, which I think is very important, because it gives everybody kind of an equal footing and an equal platform in that case. You know, obviously there's a lot of social media that's a giant cesspool, but at the same time, it's kind of almost like a great equalizer, in that, like, if you want to say something, it's going to be said and it's going to be heard. You know, there are plenty of people that I've met in the queer community I don't think I would have met otherwise, if social media weren't a thing. There are plenty of people that, you know, I've become colleagues with and really good friends with that I would not have met, who are just like me. They're women. They're, you know, in the rainbow community. They're, you know, marginalized in one way or another, and they've managed to, you know, take up space and be heard. And I think that's so big, and I think that's really what kind of sets, I think, this time period apart from any other time period, is that we do have that kind of advantage of, you know, being able to forge communities online and kind of bring them into real life, being able to hold teams and leagues accountable, and, you know, put a spotlight on them and be like, yeah, they're saying that they do this, but really they're doing that. Or, you know, this player said this, but now he's claiming to say that. And I'm not saying that people can't learn and grow, but it's just a matter of, like, you know, what other people call cancel culture, I call accountability. I call it holding people to account. I call it, you know, making sure that what they're saying is not just words, it's action, it's actual growth and education. Because I was not perfect when I was, you know, 14, 15 years old, first into the sport. There's a lot of stuff that I probably would have agreed with that's still being said in hockey today. And there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I look back on and I'm like, damn, I was an idiot. But I educated myself and I learned. And, you know, I kind of leaned into that part of myself that's like, you know what, I know what it's like to feel like this. I know what it's like to be like this. And I don't feel like it's right for me to shun or gatekeep or exclude people. And there's a lot of people like me who feel the same, and we're all kind of bonded together this way. So, you know, I think that kind of gives me hope, is that there is this large community. I mean, even with the NWHL season in Lake Placid at the beginning of the year, seeing all of the, you know, people from all walks of life who just stumbled across a women's hockey game on Twitch and they're like, oh my God, this is awesome. And just seeing, rather than being exclusionary and gatekeepy. People were like explaining the rules and explaining who this team was and that player and this and that, and bringing people in to the fold without that kind of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're a bandwagoner, this, that, and the other. Because otherwise, how do you grow the game? You know, how do you grow the fan base? And it just so happens that all of these people are from marginalized groups themselves. And that, I think, is really what kind of opened my eyes. And I'm like, you know what? We have such an amazing opportunity here that we never had before to really expand this sport and really include everybody. And it doesn't matter where you come from. If you just started watching a game on Twitch, or if you've been following for 3 decades, like, it doesn't matter. You know, ultimately, I think the community is going to be, you know, what changes it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. And I like a number of your points. I think the online space is ultimately a safe space, right? Because there's verbal attacks, but there's, you know, so there's verbal violence, but there's no risk of physical violence really online, and you can block people. Ish, but it
yeah,
like,
I would say
I get it.
doxing exists, and you know,
without a doubt, but it's a safer space than trying to jump into the sport on your own if you're a marginalized person.
Right. There's a
where you don't see
welcoming. Yeah.
You can find your people.
Yes.
And that leads to their strength in numbers and empowerment and the ability, look at Black Girl Hockey Club and how they've grown and empowered and revolutionized the sport. And then, you know, to your point about like bandwagoners, well, technically, wouldn't we all be considered, because we all started at some point after the sport already existed? So
exactly.
So in reality, like, it doesn't matter when somebody gets into the sport. It's just like, it's great that you're here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, otherwise, like, who grew up, like, who was born with a hockey stick in their hand? Nobody. Like, you know, as much as people want to raise their children to be, you know, hockey centered from the beginning, it doesn't always happen that way. And, you know, we all started watching when we saw, I mean, look at how especially the teams that get the most airtime, you know, well, I don't know about now, but the Blackhawks, the Penguins, the Capitals, you know, with those big names, with those stars, you're going to see more people start bandwagoning them, because that's the team that they noticed. And they're like, oh, this team's really good. So who doesn't want to watch a winning hockey team? I want to watch a winning hockey team. That's why I started watching the Islanders again this year. They can call that bandwagoning, because technically I didn't really watch the Islanders that much over the past few seasons. But I was watching now because they almost made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. But I've also been here since 2005. So, you know, it's just like everybody has that moment of, you know, bandwagoning, so to speak. And there's nothing wrong with that. I wish more people would bandwagon, because honestly, the ones who bandwagon are sometimes more fun than the ones who've been there from day one. So
well said. Angelica, thank you so much. You're such a positive light in this sport.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for doing this, putting this together. This is really awesome. And I'm really excited to see how it pans out.